So I'd like to introduce our featured panel. So today we have with us Aaron Hansen, who's the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources and Student Services. We have Eric Engebretson, who's the President of the Washougal Association of Educators. Dr. Mary Templeton, who's the Superintendent here in the Washougal School District. And our special guest, Ben Ibale, who is the Washington Education Association Equity and Civil Rights Coordinator. So I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, who is Dr. Templeton.
Well, thank you, Les, for that introduction. Let me just welcome everybody tonight. We are very happy to have you be joining us for this important conversation as we begin to talk intentionally in the Washougal School District about this important work. This work is around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And as you all know, we have big ideas for our school district. We see our school district rising to be a top performer in the state of Washington. We're excited about that mission, and we have put a lot of energy behind that, and we have momentum. And in order for us to continue to rise, my friends, we must commit in this district to verifying that we do not tolerate hate or racism or discrimination. The school board stands behind me as their superintendent in our equity and anti-racism statement that is clearly posted on our website. I encourage you to take a look at that. And in that statement, we acknowledge that we are supporting our students, all of our students. We're unpacking disequitable systems, and we're going to disrupt systems that have perpetuated the lack of equal opportunity and outcome for our students. We're very excited actually about this partnership. Tonight we are working, as we have been in the past and will in the future, with WEA and our local Washougal Association of Educators to talk to you about culturally responsive classroom management. As we quest to know, nurture, and challenge all of our students to rise, we understand that at the heart of the matter is what happens in the classroom. We know that our teachers matter, and they matter tremendously. I was a classroom teacher for 15 years, and they were probably the best 15 years of my career. But I know that as a classroom teacher, that we need to verify that our teachers have all the tools that they need, because indeed they have a huge responsibility to instill hope and resiliency in each of the children that walk through our doors. Our data, unfortunately, is that not every child is rising to the aspirations that I have for the 3,000 children in this school district. In fact, we can predict disequitable opportunity and outcomes of some of our students based on the color of their skin, based on their ability or their disability, based on their socioeconomic background, and perhaps based on their first language spoken. But we are committed to our children who have been furthest from educational justice. As we have said in our equity statement, we believe that our students who have experienced systemic injustice need to hear directly from us that we see them, that we value them, and that we are committed to their success. Our students with disabilities want to know that we value them and have high aspirations for their future, and we do. Our students who do not speak English as their first language want to know that we value their strengths and unique abilities, and we do. Our LGBTQ students want to know that we support and respect them, and we do. Our students experiencing socioeconomic challenges want to know that we see them as deserving of a bright future, and we do. Our Black students want to know that Black lives matter to us here in Washougal, and they do. Let me be clear, though, when I say that our work does not involve supporting political ideals or movements, but rather our work is to listen to our students and communities of color when they ask to be seen. Our work is not to invest in the polarized and charged atmosphere that exists locally and nationally, but rather to instill hope and resiliency in each child who walks through our doors. Our work here is not to pull away from one another, but rather to lean in and agree to maintain our excellent relationships and our trust of one another. Our work here is to continue to invest in excellence for all of our children and inspire our community to continue to do what they have always done in difficulty and complexity, and that is to rally around their teachers and support the important work that we all do together. We will move forward together as we approach this work with trust, respect, empathy, and compassion. Together, my friends, we will see all of our students rise. The work is not easy. The work never is. But as we approach the work of equity and anti-racism and verifying that every student is seen, known, nurtured, and challenged to rise, we will indeed rise to be a top performer in the state of Washington. And now I would like to introduce Eric Engebretson, our president of the Washougal Association of Educators, for a few words. Eric?
Thank you, Dr. Templeton. Thank you, Les and Aaron and Ben. We are happy to be able to partner with Washougal School District to work on this important issue and subject around culturally responsible and being classroom management, and why it's important to have a good nurturing and climate within our classrooms. So first of all, WEA, so the Washington Education Association, and Washougal Association of Educators, that's a tongue twister, we support inclusion for all students and understand that students who are underrepresented and underserved need to be recognized so they each get the education that they deserve. So the work that we're doing together fits nicely within both of our realms, within the union realm and the district realm. So we're looking forward to help accomplish that mission, okay? We're also looking forward to identifying ways to better support our students and our staff and community, and looking forward to breaking down those barriers that exist, which students face and teachers face as well, so we can also help our students, staff, and community. We've started this process for a while now, but we had some more intense training in August, and we'll have more intense training as we move through the year and through the years. And so we are very excited to share the work that we have done so far, and we're wanting to share with you what that looks like, so what the teachers are learning to help teach and be a part of your students' lives. So I get to have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker tonight, WEA Equity and Civil Rights Coordinator Ben Ibale. So sit back and listen. He has some great stuff. We were fascinated when we were listening to him in August. So thank you very much, Ben.
I can unmute myself. Before I start, I just want to share a little bit of who I am. I definitely feel like I'm a Washingtonian, but I moved here when I was 5 years old from the Philippines. My dad joined the U.S. Coast Guard from the Philippines because of our work in World War II with the United States, and because of that relationship, Filipinos had access, and again, amazing access to join the military, and then also become citizens. And that's something that we definitely see as an opportunity. And I had a great opportunity learning English. I was an ELL student. I was one of these immigrants, one of our immigrants in Washington State that came in knowing yes sir, no sir, and Pepsi. Those were the three phrases that I knew. And the rest of it was Tagalog and Ilocano, which is two languages spoken from the Philippines. I was overwhelmed with amazing educators, and they helped further my opportunities. But I also had challenges, like many folks that come from different parts of the world, and immigrants felt blatant racism within the classroom and the high school specifically. And I was told by my American Lit teacher to go back to the Philippines where I belonged. And that was a monumental moment for me, because I knew I had a choice to make. I could either drop out and have hatred in my heart, hatred towards people that are hating on me, or I can turn it into education. I can turn it into an opportunity and replace him, myself, and become a teacher. And that's what I did. I chose to be an American Lit teacher, not just because of that one incident, but because of all the other teachers that believed in me and said, hey, Ben, you need to become a teacher. I think you make a fantastic teacher. You got a great story. And I know that you want to work with other immigrant students and Asian Americans specifically because you never saw them, teachers, Asian teachers in school. So I became one. And that's kind of my story. And I worked for 7 years at Issaquah School District, moving from White Center. And then I got involved with association. I actually worked in Seattle with 115 different schools. And that's where I really cut my teeth and understood the differences between the haves and the have-not schools, and the resources that were limited in some schools, but were really accessible in others. And that was all within the same district. So that's kind of where I came from and why I'm here today, because I've had the pleasure and opportunity of working with so many different school districts around Washington State, from the small rurals of Prosser to Seattle to Spokane, and just all over Washington State. And it's been amazing to see the communities and the students and the educators and the families come around public education. So that's kind of my perspective. And I just want to share with you some of the kind of the highlights of what we've been doing, and specifically with Washougal. And so for some of you that have already seen it, I've tried to mix it up a little bit because we all want to kind of learn something a little bit new and in a different way. And so I'm going to share my screen now, and with a little PowerPoint here. And so this originally started in probably about 6 or 7 years ago, when our president of the WAE, similar to Eric Engebretson, hopefully I said that right. Yes, thumbs up. That we had a very concerned Kim Mead, who was the president at that time, was concerned because at a community forum, she heard and learned about the student to prison pipeline, that we wanted to take ownership as the association. And what did we do to contribute to the disproportionality of discipline, where certain targeted groups were 3 times more likely to be disciplined, expelled, or suspended just because of the color of their skin? And that happens all over the United States. And so she approached me as the Human Civil Rights Coordinator and said, hey, can we create a training around discipline and around this school to prison pipeline? And so I said, absolutely. I know I couldn't do this myself. So I reached out for funding from the NEA, and they granted us a great grant, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars so that we can do this at just basically a near cost. And then University of Washington with Dr. Elena Paddish, and we co-developed some training. But we did 2 things, 2 things that I'm very proud of before we even started. Number 1, we did community focus groups. We went around and spoke to families and communities. Unfortunately, we didn't get to Washougal, but we did go to Spokane and over in Monroe and kind of near the Bellingham area, to the Seattle, to Southwest Seattle, Tacoma. And so we really listened to what the families had to say. And then we also did 150, 160 different student focus groups. And we listened to what the students had to say. And that's why we created what we created. And what they told us really resonates with the research and what I'm about to present to you today. So this doesn't come from, an elite's perspective of this is what's best for education. What's actually where this comes from is what comes from our students and our communities and what they want to see happen in our schools, and specifically around classroom management and around dealing with equity and differences. And so that's what I'm prepared to present to you today. This simply captures the 3 frameworks that I'm going to hopefully cover. One is a culturally responsive lens. What it means to be, the idea of culturally responsive teaching is very similar to culturally responsive classroom management, and we'll share that with you. The culture competency framework, what does it mean to actually have a new lens of entering a journey of how to get to know people, how to understand people, how to really know people, right? In a way that they can be seen, heard, understood, and empathized with, because empathy is the greatest thing that you can do to another human being, is to connect with their story. But that takes a deeper understanding of how to build relationships in a culturally responsive manner. So that's what the culture competency framework is we're going to cover. And then the last one, I think, is probably the most pivotal for us, and that is really hope and resiliency. And the reason why is because I'll just, end with, start with the ending, and that is, what is the purpose of a student-teacher relationship? Is it curriculum? Possibly. I think it's important that we understand that our goal is to have our students learn from our relationships in the classroom so that they can be more engaged and learn the content. But what corresponds even more, what inspires and connects students and makes them more engaged is when we actually believe in them and when we have a relationship with them. And so what that means is your relationship, the purpose of your relationship is to increase hope and resiliency in our students, especially our struggling students. When they see that you believe in them, guess what? They're willing to possibly trust that you're looking out for them, and they may even engage more in the content. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So those are kind of the three objectives in the next half hour or so. So hopefully, and I thank you for a few minutes that extra that you gave me, because I think I'm going to probably need it. Okay, so as you can see, this is the framework. This is the same exact framework that we teach to our educators. And in turn, they actually educate us, because so much of this is experiential learning where we hear from each other. It's not a top-down approach. It's a we approach. It's a community approach. It's like you moving into a new neighborhood and opening the door and like understanding the culture of your California style housing with no yards. That's my community, versus an acre, multiple acres, in certain rural parts. Like some people are much more comfortable with that. And there's a certain culture with having space versus no space. And so we learn from our communities and from our spaces and from our neighbors and our students and our educators. And so that's why I say it's not a top-down approach. It's us trying to understand each other and building something that we want together. And that's what Washougal's goal here is to build something around what does it mean to build something with equity, to understand why we teach the ideas behind inclusion. I'm just saying Dr. Templeton's words: diversity, equity, inclusion. Why Black Lives Matter should not trigger separation, but actually inclusion. Black Lives Matter means all lives matter. We're just examining a marginalized group's perspective of life. And I think that's an important piece, just like us opening the door to our neighbors and meeting folks for the first time and trying to understand their story, because guess what? We're going to live next to them. If we don't understand their story and understand who they are, then we won't have a greater understanding of our neighborhood and our communities. So I think that's one of the ways that I like to share about that. So as you can see on the outside of this, the awareness, knowledge, skills, and advocacy that you see here, that is cultural competency. Those are choices of awareness, self-awareness, knowledge of other, skills necessary to be effective across those differences, and then advocacy, advocating for those that differ from us. So when you think about that, awareness, again, here's the definition: being aware of your own assumptions about human behavior, values, and biases. I'm Filipino. And so when I came in the United States, I had no understanding of what it meant to be, to live in America. I didn't have an understanding of that. And so as I learned, I found out that it's much more individual. In my community, we're very celebratory in that we invite not just 7 kids to your child's first birthday. I'm being real here, because this is what happened with my own wife, who's white. And she wanted to invite 7 kids to our first birthday party. And I wanted to invite 150 people to our party, because that's just community. That's how we work. And so it was cognitive dissonance. So I was not aware of my own values and biases, and I saw hers as negative. And so we had to really understand our greater awareness as we had a biracial family raising biracial kids, right? And so I think that's part of that awareness, is being aware of your own assumptions and biases. And so we had to make a choice on learning and understanding and talking it through. Knowledge is attempting to understand the worldview of culturally diverse students, families, and communities, right? So you want to learn more about other. those social group categories that you especially don't belong to, right? Why is it that certain groups behave this way based upon culture, based off celebrations, right? Why is it that Filipinos have a lot of Spanish in their language and have a lot of Spanish surnames? Well, it's because we had Spaniards that came in, conquistadors who took over the Philippines and basically married into the Filipino culture, unlike the British perspectives and British immigration. They were separate. Spanish people, they like to basically marry with the folks that they conquered, right? And so we ended up with a lot of Spanish surnames. So I mean, that's just a small little knowledge approach, but what it means to increase your knowledge about others, right? Then the skills. Now for educators, this is developing effective practices and appropriate, relevant, and sensitive strategies and skills in working with diverse populations. We have to understand that we're going to bring in students with special needs. We're going to understand that we're going to have students that come in that have trauma, that don't trust adults. And if you're going to treat that kid like that they're disrespecting you and you punish them without really understanding the why, then that's what we're talking about, is how you develop that skill set to get to know that student, understand it, and that discipline is not punishment, discipline is learning. And if the student isn't learning, then that means that punishment or that discipline is not working. So we have to kind of readapt our skills and strategies based off of the folks that we're getting to know in the groups and categories of our students. And then the last one is advocacy. And that is advocating on behalf of the needs of their students, families, and colleagues that they work with. Think about our educators as they learn more about students with special needs. One of the best examples that I have on what cultural competency means to me is when I met a mom who happens to be a parapro, and she was a woman with along the spectrum of fill in the blank, Ben, autism. Sorry, she was a woman with autism raising twins with autism, and I needed to learn more about autism because one of my son's best friends lives 2 doors down, and his brother is he's now in 2nd grade. His name's Gavin, and he's a student with autism. So I figured I might as well find some PD on this, and so I went into this paraprose class, and what she told us blew my mind, and I think it really should resonate with us now in our perspective of what it means to be culturally responsive. And this is what she said. This is in the first 5 minutes of her presentation. She basically said, every morning I wake up my kids, I get them dressed, they brush their teeth, I fix them breakfast, we sit at the table, we get our backpacks, we go to the front door, we open the door, we look at each other, and we prepare ourselves to enter your world. Enter mine. And to me, when she said, enter my world, every day you expect me to enter yours, enter mine. That, I honestly believe, is what's missing in the disconnect and the lack of dialogue among our differences. When you think about kind of the racial prejudice, when you think about the religious prejudice out there, it's a lack of understanding of hearing each other and entering their world. So I think that's why it's so critical that we enter the world of our students, that we enter the world of students who are saying, please look at me and believe that my Black life matters. Please look at me and say, my autism is not a negative thing, but it's who I am, and that you're willing to understand who I am, right? And that advocacy, that awareness, knowledge, skills, and advocacy, here's the thing, all of those are choices. This does not happen automatically, right? When you think about things that happen automatically, I've got 3 kids. I've got 2 kids in college. I've got one 6th grader, and I don't have to teach them frustration or anger. right? Those happen automatically. You don't have to teach those. But guess what I have to teach? I have to teach empathy. I have to teach hope and resiliency, right? Those are the things that we need to purposely enter opportunities where we make choices of increasing our awareness, our knowledge, our skills, and our advocacy for other, right? And lastly, the reason why I bring this up is to kind of anchor it home. So when you think of awareness, I want you to think of, do you see me? Are you aware of the students in your communities, of the struggles that our students have when they enter your space? That our students from low socioeconomics that come in have no hopes and dreams and aspirations because college is just way too far and way too expensive for them. And so they don't even see that. Do you see that, right? Knowledge, do you hear them? Are you willing to listen to what they have to say, to hear their story, that knowledge piece? So do you want to hear them? Skills, and that is, do you know them? That's a skill to really understand and know your students. It's a skill for me to go and greet my neighbors and see who they are and where they're from. And those are skill sets, not automatic for everybody, right? And then lastly is advocacy. And that is, do you feel them? Do you understand their story where you have empathy? But don't just stop at empathy. The difference between advocacy and empathy is this: action. You want to move it to action. Advocacy means you take a step forward for somebody else. So do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you know me? And do you feel me enough to take action? And I think that's what we want to employ, is just that idea that we want to move to action and not just say, we got great equity, but we want to move to action. So when you think about that here, that's just this outside, right? You can't go into the skills until you go through awareness, knowledge, skills, and advocacy, because the skills, if you notice in the center, that is what our community members and our students told us they need. And this is what they need, right? Building social relationships. That those are strategies to improve classroom management and to improve culturally responsive teaching, is to build relationships with our students. Communicate in culturally responsive ways. What does respect look like and sound like to this student? Do they perceive that I'm respecting them? Because if they perceive that I'm disrespecting them, guess what? I'm a high school kid, a middle school kid, they're going to shut down because they don't trust you. And guess what? They don't care. And so if you show that, that you are willing to build a relationship with them, they're going to show that, hey, guess what? I'm willing to listen to you, right? And especially in a Zoom, the fact that we have 30 people looking at a square box, I'm hoping that I'm making some level of connection. But imagine having to do this every single day with our students and lacking that relationship, right? Cultivating safe and inclusive environments and culturally responsive behavior interventions. So those are the skills necessary to be more effective in your teaching and in your classroom management. And so when you look at the center, it's a civic participation outcome. Those are the choices that Dr. Mary Templeton is creating. Like, there's certain expectations that she wants for her district to have these participation outcomes or objectives. And guess what? Teachers have their own civic participation outcomes. They have their own objectives, right, for our students, and so do you. But here's the thing. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here. When you only focus on that participation outcome, right, you're only focusing on the task, right? You're only focusing on that seed, that technical piece, the graduation requirements, goals, objectives, timelines, Washington state laws, tests, curriculum, online learning, equity. If those are just simply tasks, and you say, okay, Ben, you're in my classroom, here's all the tasks. You're in my districts, here's all the tasks. And that can be overwhelming for people. Now, what's as equal to the task? Because here's the thing, in organizational leadership, and all of you that are in organizations and workplaces, you totally get what I'm saying here. Task is really critical. You cannot eliminate those tasks. That's what makes you an organization, right? It makes you more profitable, or it makes you have meaning in your work, is to complete those tasks. But what organizational leaders will tell you and organizational development specialists will tell you is that task is equal to relationship. And if you don't focus on relationships as equal to task, you will never reach your mission and vision. So if you look at the left side, graduation requirements and all those things, guess what's going to help you reach your ultimate goal, your mission and vision? Culture competency, the will and skill to create authentic and effective relationships across difference, educator to student relationships, educator to whole class relationships, student-student relationships, educator to family, educator to educator. But guess what? How often do we focus on those different levels of relationships? Some of us, zero, because we're so focused on task. But some of us see this as balanced, that we need to focus 100% on relationship and 100% on task, right? So that's why I want to go back to the seed and soil. So I'm going to go back to that thing. The civic participation outcome, that's your seed. Whatever goals and objectives that you have in your classroom or even in your community or your family, right? What are your goals? But if those goals, if those are outcomes, you're so focused on it, but you're focusing on the seed and you never focus on the soil, what happens to the relationships in our communities, in our families, in our classrooms, in our schools, right? That's what I believe is disconnected, because that's what our students are saying and that's what our families are saying. Our families, when we did our when we did our community focus groups, you know what they said? We trust you that you'll be equitable if you know my child. If you know and have a relationship with my kid, I'm going to trust that you're going to be fair. But if you don't know my kid, guess what? You're going to be full of bias because you're going to judge my kid because my kid comes in with wearing these shoes, wearing this thing, giving you this attitude. And of course, you're going to have bias. And of course, you're going to mistreat them. But if you understand the why of their behaviors and you understand our family and you understand who the student is, we trust you. We trust you to do the right thing. But if you don't, then that's the problem. And I think that brings us back to just the idea that when you think about curriculum, half your curriculum walks in through the door, or half of your curriculum clicks that Zoom link or that whatever that classroom online learning is, they click on it. That's half of your curriculum. Master that culture, master that soil, and watch what happens to the curriculum. Watch what happens to those participation outcomes. And here's what's cool. The research is behind us. This came from Increasing Equity in School Discipline. Look at their framework for increasing equity in school discipline from the American Educational Research Council, right? Association. Number one for prevention, supportive relationships. That's number one. And then it goes into bias awareness in classroom and respectful school environments and academic rigor, culturally relevant responsive teaching, opportunities for learning and correcting behavior. If those are the seeds, look what the soil is: supportive relationships, right? And that's why it's so critical when you analyze the relationships that we have the opportunity, that we have the privilege to be able to build relationships with caring adults that could impact our students towards their future, that we would want to make sure that we're building teacher to whole class relationships. Educator, we're talking parapros, we're talking front office, we're talking bus drivers when we finally get them, right? To individual students, that you build relationships with them. But then here's look number three. Do not think that number three is not prioritized, because it should be, because your student-to-student relationships basically are the measurement of your soil. That is what's that test, that soil test? Somebody knows. Aaron, you probably know what that is, right? What's that test for the soil test, whether something will grow in there or not?
I think it's to do with the acidic level.
Acidic level. There you go. Student-to-student relationships are the acidic level, right? That's the acidic test to whether or not your culture is working. And what I mean by that is this: when students begin to believe that you believe in them, they begin to believe in each other. When you have teachers that begin to build relationships between student and teacher, and then that same teacher begins to facilitate opportunities, very intentional opportunities to connect relationships between student and student, they're going to look at each other like, wow, you want us to build relationships with each other? I guess that's kind of cool. And here's the crazy part. Our students are requesting that. That was one of our #1 findings in our research with those 160 different student focus groups from around Washington State. And that was, help us connect with each other. That is the strength of adolescence. They're trying to understand their own identity. That's what adolescence is seeking identity. And what better way to seek identity than through facilitated caring adults who are building relationships with them and helping them connect with each other. That's why the student-student relationships is such a critical component on the acidity of your soil, of your classroom culture and your community culture. Talk to your students. Teacher to family relationships. Guess what? The research shows that that is the greatest strategy to closing the opportunity gap. We hear about these opportunity gaps, achievement gaps, right? Among marginalized populations. The best way to decrease that is to engage families, is to build trust with the other caring adults in their lives. Is to show that, guess what? I think I know what you're going through. I'm here for you too. So let me know what's going on so I can help with your student, right? So that teacher to family relationship is so critical to help lead them and guide them through the bureaucracy of public education, right? That's why on Mercer Island, the #1 predictor for education is the education of the mother. And in Mercer Island, you know how many, there's a strong percentage of doctorates there. And I'm not saying it's just because you live on Mercer Island, you got a doctorate and you're intelligent. The main predictor is that they understand the bureaucracy of education. They understand what it means to go through elementary school, middle school, and college and doctorate, right? That they will help facilitate and guide through that. Well, guess what? We can do that as caring adults to help our families and our students, to help guide them through this bureaucracy of education. Because that's really what it comes down into is somebody that's going to help you along that journey, right? That's been there before. And then the last one is educator to educator relationships. And please do not minimize that, because when I say, how do we increase the hope and resiliency in our students? Because that's the greatest factor towards graduation, is a student's ability to get back up when they fall, right? Is how do you grow that hope and resiliency? Well, the only way you can grow it is through meaningful, caring adult relationships that believe in that child, right? That connect with that child and help that child time travel to a future destination point in 4 different areas: home and family, career and education, talents and hobbies, and community and volunteerism. Those are the whole child, right? Now, if we're saying that for students, what about our adults? How are we connecting with our educators? How are we believing in our educators? And how are we supporting them and helping them plant future destination points for themselves in our community in Washougal, right? And I think that's the critical piece. And I know that that staff culture is going to either thrive or dive based upon the amount of time that you spend developing those meaningful, caring adult relationships with each other. And so please prioritize time. And I'm talking to the administrators in the district because they're the ones that really direct the time. And I'm saying direct the time to connect with each other, right? Now, I'm going to give you some bad news here. We've got about 9 more minutes. And so we talked about the relationship to seed in the soil and the identity, right? And that the students are negotiating those tasks. They're negotiating the task and the relationship. That's why relationships with students are so critical, because they're trying to negotiate their identity through your tasks and through your relationship. If they don't have a relationship with you, do you think your kid's going to wash the dishes? Oh, heck no, right? If they feel cared for and respected and modeled, yeah, man, I'll wash the dishes for my mom anytime because I know she cares about me and she loves me. She Filipino mom cooks and just makes amazing food. So yeah, I'm gonna do what I need to do in order to get that. Well, it's the same principle, right? that task and that seed and the technical piece, they're negotiating that identity. So here's the thing. What happens with a culture that continually bypasses the culture and the soil, and they try to go right to task? Well, that, welcome everyone, is where we are in America. And that's where we are right now. And so when you start seeing things like equity, when you start seeing things like Black Lives Matter, and it triggers you and it triggers a negative for you, right? Or you begin to see new racial equity protocols and practices rise up. Here's the problem. You're disconnected from your why. You're disconnected from the relationship as to why you're operationalizing there. So when you think about that, if you bring it back to the classroom, if you bring it back to the community, when you're trying to complete a task and without relationship, you need to stop and go back and rebuild it. So when you think about visualization, that visualize, where are we on our moral, is it a moral implication? Is it a moral mandate to address racial injustice? Not everybody believes that there's racial injustice. And so we need to begin to talk and listen to hear each other and talk about what's our mission and vision. Where's equity in our practice as classroom instructors? Where do we see racial justice and equity fit into Washougal, right? Versus being triggered because you see all of these responses that have been politicized. And so you just jump to the politicization of it versus really trying to understand the story behind it, right? What's the story, right? And so when you begin to share and have agreement about racial justice, what racial justice and how that strategic imperative is in Washougal and in our communities, that we have a commitment to having equity in our systems, in our communities, then guess what? We can begin to build a future together. But if we just polarize based off of, I don't agree with this operationalizing on equity, when you haven't had that opportunity to discuss it, I think that's where a lot of our schools are, because our educators haven't had the opportunities to thoroughly discuss what this means and implies with them. And then you can begin to normalize where you have relevant and routine, explicit conversations about race, and you're okay with it. When you talk about the inequity and the racial disparities in discipline, that everybody's coming in from the same perspective because you know why you're talking about it. And then organizing all that simply is all of us in Washougal as adults are leaders. We're all leaders. So we all need to educate. We all need to develop on how are we going to do this in our schools? How are we going to address these inequities and these systems when we're just trying to operationalize? How are we going to be leaders and to discuss it and really get to know, increase our awareness, our knowledge, our skills, and our advocacy for each other, right? And so when you think about racial justice, I just want to make sure I got time here. When you think about racial justice, this is the definition that we'll be using. I haven't actually introduced this, but I wanted to bring it up to you as the community, so you know kind of where we're going. And that is, racial justice is the systemic fair treatment of people of all races that results in equitable opportunities and outcomes for everyone, right? So, because when we talk to our students and you tell them, hey, what do you believe is fair? Guess what? A kindergartner and a first grader will tell you what's fair and what's not based on how they're treated out in the playground during recess. They know what's not fair, right? And oftentimes it's associated with, they won't play with me. I'm being excluded. They feel bad. And so, but guess what? Kindergartners and first grade teachers have such a wealth of opportunity to talk about what that means to build relationships with each other, what it means about fair treatment, right? Because we've had horrific discussions that stemmed from triggers of students saying racially volatile statements, using the N-word, equating words with color of skin, with bad connotation. And our teachers, oftentimes they shy away from those conversations because they're not prepared. While others, they stumble through it and they want to do what's right. And guess what? That's okay, right? We want to empower and give our folks the opportunities to discuss this, but discuss it with a specific strategy in mind, right? And so that's why we come to this, this thing of what's your why? And the why of caring adult relationships. Why are we working with our young people? Why is Dr. Mary Templeton working with students still to this day, right? And the reason being is because we're there. It's the intentional relational intervention and moves, classroom lessons, and adult behaviors that increase hope and resiliency in students. So when you think about our educators that are really stepping in for our marginalized students, and really trying to support students that come from different populations that have experienced things like Black Lives Matter movements, and we're trying to help each other understand and connect. Guess what? My job is to grow their hope and their resiliency, and through all of this. My other job is to make connections with the students that don't understand it. Okay, and I can tell you this, and I've spoken with a lot of educators. Educators aren't trying to manipulate or brainwash people. They're trying to actually give you the ability to critically analyze and understand different perspectives from an educational piece. We're not here to tell you who to vote for or who to support. We're here to help you understand what all of this means to this student, to you, and help you negotiate and understand, right, the task and the relationship in all of this called public education. And so that's why our educators have to rely on their relationships and to connect with students so that they can connect with these bigger critical analysis pieces as we walk them through it. And so when you think about this is why the belief system versus a program. Again, it's the culture versus the seed. It's the soil versus the seed. It's the technical versus the culture. Do our guiding principles and belief statements speak to our beliefs about children, right? Why is it important that we understand each other's personal guiding principles for why we do the work? And why is it important that we connect our mission statements to a common belief system? So I know that, you're walking through this opportunity of conflict with all other cities and districts actually in the United States. We're at a critical moment. And I believe that dialogue is the answer, that meaningful dialogue and understanding is the answer. And I want to kind of go there with you a little bit. But again, I want to show you this, that student resilience grows through guided struggle, right? Student resilience grows through guided struggle. And that's what we're trying to, this is my definition. I actually thought about this today because I was thinking, what's another way of thinking about resiliency and why we want to help, why does the research show that resiliency is the greatest factor towards graduation? And why is it that the only way to increase resiliency is through meaningful, caring adult relationships that believe in our kids more than they believe themselves, provide opportunities for success, right? And help that student time travel to the future, to come back to the present, to prepare, right? And in one of the best ways, and I know that oftentimes as parents, I'm a parent of 3, we want to protect our students from struggle. We want to protect them. We don't want them to struggle. In fact, we're going to give everybody a trophy so that everybody feels success. It's like, no, right? I'm from X gen. I want my child to have soft struggles. I want my child to skin their knee and say, you see, that's why you don't go on a skateboard at 30 miles an hour going down a hill. All right, you get hurt, but guess what? I'm gonna help pick you up, but you're gonna make good judgment next time. So just that idea that this is a struggle that many of us are going through right now. Why not take an opportunity to guide our students through this struggle with greater awareness, greater hope, greater resiliency, greater knowledge, right? In connecting with our communities. So enable children to emerge from challenging experiences with a positive sense of themselves and their futures. Children who develop resilience are better able to face disappointment, learn from failure, cope with loss, and adapt to change. We recognize resilience in children when we observe their determination, their grit, and their perseverance to tackle problems and cope with the emotional challenges of school life. Right now, it's a pretty monumental school challenge, y'all. Everything from our COVID to our social our social conflicts around race and Black Lives Matter. But guess what? We're here to help walk our students through it to emerge with greater hope and resilience, right? And that's our goal. So kind of reaching towards the end here, but how do we do that? How do we engage in dialogue? Well, this is kind of the perspective that we were going to push forward on how to dialogue around conflicts. It's called Courageous Conversations. Simply, I'm going to talk about 4 of them really quick. I think there's is there a question here? Okay. Number 1 is stay engaged, right? Don't be so triggered by a statement or an action or behavior that's going to shut you down, right? I want you to stay engaged, and meaning that means that you remain morally and emotionally, intellectually, and socially involved in the dialogue. Okay, but do not be one of these folks. We have a term, and that's called predatory listening. That's basically you collecting all your memes from that past week, and you're just gonna throw it on Facebook every time you see something, right? You're already prepared for what you're going to do to attack. That's called predatory listening, and that's not what staying engaged means. We want you to stay engaged to actually get to the why. Like, okay, help me understand this, right? And I'll talk more about that, because number 2 is experience discomfort. Again, remember why I said that we try to protect our kids from discomfort, when in all reality, our greatest discomforts are our greatest learnings. Our greatest struggles in life, we're talking the horrific things, from divorce to deaths to all those things that all of us human beings go through tragedy, right? Oftentimes those tragic moments where we have the greatest discomfort, that's where our greatest learning is, because our system has been disturbed to the point where we're forced to kind of think and reconsider and change, right? So we want you to go press towards that discomfort, right? We don't want you to shy away from it. We want you to press into it. Okay, all of our educators have talked about this, and that is the amygdala. The amygdala is the fight or flight, right? When you are triggered by a statement and you are either fighting and you throw out that meme, you're triggered, you attack, or you just run away or you shut down. That's when your amygdala is fired, right? Where we want you to be is in your prefrontal cortex. That's where your wisdom, where your processing lies. And that's where we want you to be. So in terms of differences and conflicts within our schools, within our students, within our communities, man, go towards that discomfort and press in. And here's the 2 questions that I would ask you to practice at home, even with your kids, especially with your kids. And this is what I would say. Next time your kid triggers you, just say, man, go to your room. Ask them either two of these questions: help me understand, or tell me more, right? And you can practice this with your partner or your spouse too. Like when you're triggered to fly off the handle as well in defensiveness, shut yourself down and just say, look, okay, Ben talked about pressing into my discomfort, and what you just told me, man, it just triggered me. I'm uncomfortable, but guess what? I want you to help me understand. I want you to tell me more about why you said that, about what you mean by that, and help me understand your perspective, right? So speak your truth, expect and accept non-closure. And if we can just have that as a community, man, all of our communities from White Center to Washougal, that's where I grew up, was White Center. From White Center to Washougal, I can tell you that I think we would leave a wave of greater connection and greater communities if we open up that dialogue, and stay engaged, experience that discomfort, and press in. Don't be afraid to speak your truth, but also be willing to listen to somebody else's truth. And finally, expect and accept non-closure, because just because Washougal is saying that they're doing these equity trainings does not mean that they get to check the box and say, hey, Chequity, we are now culturally competent because of these 3 trainings that we don't need anymore. No, it's constant. It's constantly growing, constantly reflecting, and constantly learning so that we can be more effective with our students, right? Okay, so I want to close. I know I kind of missed a little bit here, but I want to close on some two last positive notes here. One is this is the definition that we use for culture competency. So when you think about, don't be some people are triggered by the term culture competency or diversity, but just know that I've tested this across political lines from all extremes. And I can tell you, I have not met one person on any political lines that says, I do not want my kid to have the will and skill to create authentic and effective relationships across difference. In fact, I see the complete opposite. Family members, teachers, educators, and students, they want to have the will and skill to create authentic and effective relationships across our differences. And that's why I feel we need to engage in dialogue. And that's a definition that we discuss. And when you think about those definitions of what those differences are, these are all those differences. These are all the differences that keep us so unique. And if your perspective is that it keeps us separated, then that's your perspective. But I would say that it's what makes our world so much richer when we can build relationships with people from different social group categories, from ethnicity to indigenous membership to sexual orientation to religion to gender identity, age, whatever it is, right? And I think it's important that we maintain that dialogue to understand each other's perspectives. Because if we don't, if we only focus on the soil, on the seed, then this is Washington State public education for you. This is education at its most bureaucratic point, right? And you don't, and so what we want to know is where's the hope, where's the relationship in this, and that's what we want to build in Washougal, is to have connections relationally, relational interventions in public schools with our students, with our communities, with our educators, right? And so that leads us to the last thing, and I close with these 3 universal truths. And this is, I tell this for parents because I learned about this probably about 15 years ago. And it comes from Rick Miller, and basically 3 universal truths of how do you increase hope and resiliency in our students. And I'm saying this as a father, and I feel like I've been pretty successful with my 2 daughters and my 6th grader, because I feel like they are making great decisions, and they're full of hope and full of resiliency, and they share the hope and that resiliency that lies within them with others. And I think that's the measure, is whether or not they share it with others, and they do. And so this is, if you want, these are the 3 universal truths. Number 1, believe. You got to believe in your child, believe in the student, demonstrate your belief, and that of your school is that you believe all kids are capable of success, no exceptions. That's the belief system we got to have, because that's what students are asking, because guess what? They're told that we don't believe in you, that your life doesn't matter. And so when you hear a student saying, man, does my life matter? It should not be a question. You should be saying it explicitly in all of our students. And right now, our Black students are saying, does my Black life matter? And I encourage you that just because you say Black lives matter, that should equate to saying all lives matter. It's not an either or, it's both when you believe in it, right? So believe. Number 2, connect. Kids do better in life when they have meaningful and sustainable relationships with caring adults. You can't just connect with a student once. You can't just give birth, spend a week with them, and then send them off, and then come back and they're 16, say, hey man, it's all good. No, you got to constantly connect and reconnect with their students, right? And then last one is universal truth 3, believe, connect, and time travel. Time travel. Teaching kids the power of time travel to 4 destination points. Hope is the ability to visit your future, return the present, and prepare for the journey. This skill is taught and learned. Are you teaching your young people to be time travelers, right? And so career education, home, family, community volunteers, hobbies, and talents. As a parent, I ask on a yearly basis. I ask my kids, hey, what are your goals this year for career and education? What do you want to do for your junior year, for your 7th grade year? What are your hopes and dreams and aspirations for home and family? How are you going to develop that this year? What are you going to do with home and family this year? What about community volunteerism? What's your goal this year for community volunteerism? What about your hobbies and talents? What are you developing this year, right, for your hobbies and talents? I try to keep it away from just career education, engaged, and salary and all that stuff. And that stuff's important. But the stuff that makes us alive and who we are the other things as well. So make sure that we talk about that with our students, with the curriculum and so on. And I always end on a last quote. And a quote comes from a very powerful writer. During the 1930s, he wrote about the American dream. His name is James Truslow Adams. He wrote an essay about the haves and the have-nots based off of the roaring 20s and 30s when the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And he wrote something about the American dream. I encourage you to go Google him, because read that essay, 1935, The American Dream, because I would say that he's one of the first people that coined the term the American dream. And so we all know what the American dream is all about now, but I think you should go check out one of the original folks that actually talked about it. But I want to end the quote with something that he said on education. And it's pretty simple. And all he said is this: there's two types of education. One teaches you how to make a living, and the other one teaches you how to live, right? And I think that's what a caring adult does. It helps guide students through their struggles, helps them understand what it means to live and connect with each other and build a community. So thank you for your time. And so I think we have some few minutes for some Q&A. Sorry, I think I went over a little bit here. So I know I gave you a lot. So I think so a little Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. That was really great. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to listen to that, the pieces of that were the same again. I think I caught some of the things I missed the first time when we went over that. So for those of you who are new to join us, there's a Q&A option that's down at the bottom of the Zoom window under Q&A, so for question and answer. And if you'll take a minute to type a couple questions in there, we're going to pass those out to our panelists and try to get through as many of them as we can. I'm going to give you a minute or two to do that. I do have a couple that were submitted via email, and so I'm going to read one of those. And the first one is for Assistant Superintendent Aaron Hansen. And the question is from Brooke, and it was, will the school take extra steps to make sure their Black and POC staff and students know that they are safe from racist threats, bullying, and cyberbullying?
Thank you, Les. And Ben, thank you, as Les stated, we really appreciate your message. And I have so many notes, and I've listened to you multiple times. So every time I get a chance to listen to you, I learned so much. So regarding that question, so extra steps. So I appreciate that question. I want to state clearly that we do not tolerate discrimination, hate, or racism. And that is a statement that was made by our superintendent recently, and it's a part of our anti-racist and equity statement that's on our website. And so the steps that we are taking, I think, to start is training our staff with culturally responsive classroom practices, and them being aware and raising not only their level of awareness but empathy on what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and developing relationships with students, because I agree with Ben, it starts there. And we want our students to have someone that they can go to. So when this happens, when one of our students or staff experience discrimination, hate, or racism, that they have someone they can go to for support. I believe this starts with education. And so educating our students and our staff around creating a safe, supportive environment and community, so our students and staff do feel safe when something comes up like this, that we deal with it. We have board policies and procedures. So for students, it's educating our students that where they go, other than to an adult, is we have a harassment, harassment, intimidating, and a bullying policy. So board policy 3207. So that has a form associated with it. And so a student who experiences something as you've described, they can use that form, and that starts this process. And we follow our, it's called the HIB, harassment, intimidation, bullying process. For our staff, it's called the civility policy. So our staff can also complete the form. What we hope is when there is harm done, that we work through that. And then where there's harm, that we can restore that harm. And so sometimes what that looks like is we do what's called a restorative conference, where the individuals have an opportunity to express their experiences with that. When it's a situation, depending on the severity of it, we may not do that. If it involves bullying, harassment, intimidation, then that wouldn't be the case, and administratively we would handle that situation, and that would be the same for an adult. So I do appreciate the question, and I know that that this occurs in our community, it occurs in our buildings, and we want to again educate our students and our staff and our community around just the negative impact that has on individuals, because we want to create a safe, supportive environment, and as Ben stated, that includes hope and resiliency for all our students to be successful.
Great. So there's a follow-up question which says, what about when a student has been harassed by a teacher?
So if a student has been harassed by a teacher, we definitely would like that student to make us aware of that. What I failed to mention is we do have an online form that can be completed. It's in our safety concerns section on our website. And so that can be done anonymously, or you can individuals can include their contact information, and myself and a few other district level staff receive that form, and we respond to those forms, and that starts the process. If a student, again, is harassed, intimidated, bullied by a staff member, then I would hope that that individual would go to an administrator or go to a counselor and seek support, so we could follow up and ensure that that no longer continues.
Great. So the another question is for community members who seem concerned or confused about the meaning behind the phrase Black Lives Matter. How would you address it to increase understanding between people who support this phrase and those who don't? And that's from Michelle. And I will tab Dr. Templeton to answer that one.
So, great. So straight talk. That's how we roll here. That's the question I think has been at the heart of the matter. And as I stated at the opening, is that clearly that our work is not to support political movements or ideals, but rather our work is to support our children and our communities. And when our students, our Black students, are telling us, I want to be seen, I want to be valued, I want to be known, and I want to be part of the known, nurtured, and challenged rise, I want my voice heard, we have a responsibility to say, yes, indeed, I do see you, and yeah, your life does matter. It matters a lot. And it's the same, and as Ben was explaining very articulately, when we think about, do Black lives matter to us in Washougal? Yes, they do. Do all lives matter? Yes, they do. It's either or, it's and. And right now, our students, our Black students in our communities of color want to hear from us. And so that is our statement, and we will stand by that, that indeed we see you, we value you, and your lives do matter.
I just want to add one bit to that, Dr. Templeton, and last, that those are conversations that we're having. And in those conversations, we identify ththose as courageous conversations as we isolate what is it. And just as Ben shared and Dr. Templeton shared, it for us, for me, it's identifying that our Black students do matter and their families do matter, and we want to be upfront with that. They matter to us, and they aren't mutually exclusive. It's and so those conversations, they need to happen. Those are the type of conversations that we hopefully people will lean into and understand where we're coming from, as we are trying to support all of our students to be successful and feel supported, especially in these challenging times.
And if I might just add another comment on that, when we are asking ourselves what are the outcomes, so we are a data-driven organization, we look at the outcomes, and data is not always the hard numbers, it's also perception, reality, and feelings, and how I was treated. But when we are talking about our students who have historically not had the same opportunity and outcome, and there's a difference, right? We sometimes offer opportunity because our system's really trying to work towards that, but the outcome isn't the same. And if that is the case, then we have a moral obligation to unpack that. And we phrase that as we have a responsibility to disrupt inequitable systems. And I've been asked recently, what do you mean by disrupting an inequitable system? And let me say this, if indeed our students of color are being disproportionately suspended or excluded or disciplined, we need to unpack that and ask what's going on with that. What is the system that's allowing that to happen? If our students with disabilities are historically underperforming in reference to their able peers, we have to unpack that and say we're not okay with that. We just are not okay with that any longer. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about disrupting. And at the heart of the matter, it is relationship. And as Ben, again, very articulately described, what happens in the classroom. And when a teacher has a strong understanding of self and a strong commitment to knowing, truly knowing each of the children that walk in the door, understanding how one's own bias might intersect negatively, to professionally manage that and to build strong relationships with each child that walks through that door, that's where the magic starts to happen. But it doesn't stop there. I have a dream. I really have a dream that the student-to-student relationship is such where we understand we value each other. I recognize difference, I embrace difference, I appreciate difference, and I celebrate difference. And I don't pull away, I lean in. And I have courageous conversations, and I have articulate expressions of what I believe, but I listen and I build strong connections. So that is at the heart of the matter. That is at the heart of what happens in a classroom. And that's why, again, we're very excited about the culturally responsive classroom management, because I believe there's a lot there that we need to work on. We're not there, but we are, we're committed to the work.
Okay, so there's a question about how are our Black and people of color staff members protected by Washougal School District when parents campaign against them and even threaten them? And I think that's probably a question for Aaron.
Yeah, so yes, I'll take that. So, well, we hope that information is shared with us, and when it is shared with us, and let's say it's through district communication, so our district email and individuals are reaching out. Again, we have a civility policy that we prefer to follow that process. So when there is an individual has a complaint about a staff member, that policy, we hope that that individual would go to the staff member or the program where there is the concern. If that doesn't happen and we become aware of it, then we try to facilitate that process. But if the individual who has the concern is unwilling to meet with the staff member, or if the staff member doesn't feel like that's a safe situation, then we collect the information, and then we go to the staff member and share with the staff member that information. In the example that you're giving, that maybe it's this, if it's something that's happening on social media, we have a hard time controlling things that happen on social media. And so this has been a steep learning curve for me in my role, is how do we support our staff members when there's social media and there's actually communication going back and forth, and it involves different platforms. So as much as possible, we want to connect with those individuals and see if we can kind of unpack what's going on and try to isolate what the concern has been. And that has been the example recently, is we've been working with individuals, sometimes meeting in person, sometimes meeting over Zoom, sometimes meeting, having phone conversations about what is the concern. And because what we don't want to do is infringe on an individual's First Amendment rights. And so people get to share their concerns and voice their thoughts. And as much as possible, we want to engage in conversation about that and see, again, if we can really try to better understand where they're coming from, and let them know that if what they're doing is impacting our school community in a negative way, then we want to approach it from a way of, again, identifying if there's been harm done, how can we restore that harm? And sometimes with social media, it's multiple people engaging in this practice. And so my advice would be, and continues to be, that is not a place to have these kind of conversations, is via Facebook or Twitter. That we, as much as possible, try to create a civil, respectful conversation, and try to understand where we're coming from.
Okay, so I want to protect some time for Assistant Superintendent Hansen to talk about the next steps in the district's equity work, and then also to kind of wrap things up for everybody here. And so I will pass it off to you.
Great, thank you. So I want to start with a quote that I recently read. It's from Angel Williams, and the quote is this: "It's without internal change, there can be no outside change. Without collective change, no change matters." And that, as I look at this situation in my role as an assistant superintendent who supports human resources and student support, and in this capacity right now, as I am identified as our civil rights and equity officer. And every school district in the state of Washington, and nearly 300, has an equity and civil rights officer. And that's one of my roles. And I really appreciate and have continued to appreciate the school district and the support they have provided me. And this is in almost 20 years of work with the school district, I see that this is probably the most challenging, and I think it's going to be the most rewarding opportunity for me in my roles. Back to this quote, this idea of internal change, that I think that when I look about myself and what I'm doing is in trying to find out more and more about where I come from and my identities, and helping me have these conversations, these courageous conversations. I think about our district and what we're doing with training our certificated staff with culturally responsive practices. That's all about in October 9th, when we have a training, all-day training that Ben and Yelena are going to be facilitating. It's about building that foundational understanding of our staff in this work, so they are confident to have these conversations, these courageous conversations that aren't going to be easy, but that they will have the confidence to have these conversations and develop these relationships as Ben has explained and described. I don't think there's going to be outside change if we don't, as a district, identify these things that we do that create barriers. We don't know all of the things that we do, but that's what this equity work is about, is identifying what are the things that we are currently doing that maybe are causing there to be barriers or potentially limiting our students' opportunities. So we want to disrupt those things. We want to identify those things. Without collective change, there is no change. So this isn't something that one person can do. I appreciate the partnerships that we have with WAE and with WEA. These are monumental. The fact that we are joining together, and throughout the summer as we were talking with WAE, equity continued to be at the center. It continued to be a priority. And I believe that that is the case still. And so the support that WAE has provided, and their ideas, and really leading this work and connecting with Ben, we very much appreciate. And I think that as Dr. Templeton said, and as Ben has said, our teachers are crucial. That's where it happens, is in the counselors, and the counselors as well supporting our students. So in the classroom, as much as we can support our teachers to build these relationships, our counselors to build these relationships, it is going to make a difference. We realize that if our goal is to provide all of our students with the same career opportunities, I just want to read to those participating, our strategic planned equity goal is this: that we will engage in intentional efforts to identify disparities that create opportunity gaps and take action to eliminate the achievement gap. We will develop and strengthen students' agency so they are prepared for careers, college, and life. So if that is truly our goal in developing their agency, and I heard Ben multiple times describing that the idea of agency, that hope and resiliency in our students so they can advocate for themselves, but in many cases they need us to advocate for them and to be in that role, to mentor and to guide. So next steps as far as our equity plan. We have a district planning equity team that has been meeting twice a month. And we are, and I'm a part of that with a few other district staff, and we are developing our plan, which includes for this year, measurable outcomes. So these are our outcomes for this year, again, with the idea that this is going to be a 3 to 5 year plan. So each school will have a building equity team that meets monthly, and that's starting, I believe it's already started in some buildings, but officially in October. The district will be working on a district equity advisory team. So our equity, diversity, inclusion team that we're very excited about, and we'll be communicating soon with the process for individuals who are interested. And we may have some of those individuals here tonight who want to be a part of our team that's going to represent our student population in our community. So we are seeking probably 15 to 20 individuals who are help be a part of the advisory team that's going to meet multiple times between now and April, which is when we want to be able to develop not only our equity plan for the next several years, but also our equity policy. So as a district, we don't currently have an equity policy and procedure. We want to develop that. But before we develop that, we want to hear from our students and our parents. So Ben and Yelena Panish are going to be assisting with us in developing our focus groups and collecting information for our community. It would be very easy for us to grab an equity policy for our neighboring district or Tumwater or Shoreline because they've already done this work, but we don't want to do that. We want to create an equity plan, policy and procedures that matches what our community wants and identifies point blank what our needs are and moving this work forward. So the equity advisory team will help us develop not only the policy and the procedure, but a tool that's going to allow us to help in our decision making. And so that's an equity decision-making tool. And so they're going to help create that. Along with that, we'll continue our classroom cultural management program through Ben and Yelena. So that's going to continue throughout this year. And we're hoping that this is going to just roll into next year. We're going to continue this work with Yelena and Ben. So that's in a quick nutshell, but we will be communicating out shortly to our community that we're looking for volunteers to be part of our equity advisory team.
Okay, so we had another question which was about specifically about Black Lives Matter, and the question was posed by several people, which is why did the school backtrack their stance on Black Lives Matter? And I think Ben wanted to talk just a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of the district, but I can definitely talk a little bit about kind of how do we move forward. And I think that, like I said, like you have these conflicts and you have organizations and movements. And I believe that the appropriate way to do it and to address it is to build something of your own kind of mission and vision and future as Washougal on what does it mean to Washougal to believe in Black Lives Matter, right? In that statement by itself. When you think about Black Lives Matter, what caused it? I think you go back through historically and find out, well, why is it that Black people, our students of color, have felt marginalized, and how do we change that? And I think number one is you talk to the students, you talk to the students, and you talk to the communities, just like what we did with. I learned that from the communities, by the way. I was a community organizer in Seattle on education for Seattle Education Association. And you know what the community members told me? Every time I came and knocked on their door and said, hey, I'm from the association. We're trying to garner support for public education and check out our plan. And you know what they told me? Here's what they said. So you're asking us to certify your plan that you created for us, and we weren't at the table? Yeah. Why didn't you ask us at the beginning? Why didn't you bring us in and talk with us about what we want and what you want and build something together? And I believe that is the answer. I mean, the political side it will always stay the political side. I rarely go to Washington, D.C. I rarely go into those avenues, but I can take a message that I hear and bring it back to a district and say, okay, what are your thoughts on this? And how do you vision around this idea of closing the opportunity gap, right? And then bargain around that, right? And that's what we did in Seattle, is we took that term opportunity gap, or at that time achievement gap, and said, what do we do about this? How do we garner money and funding to help eliminate the opportunity and achievement gap. I think you do the same strategy. I think you inherently understand the message of Black Lives Matter and the message in public schools. Why do Black Lives Matter not matter in public schools from student perspectives? And I can tell you as a student of color, it was because I never saw myself. I looked through, every year I would look through my history book to see where am I? And finally, in my junior year, I saw Asian American immigration, 1970s. I'm like, that's my story. Oh my gosh. And so I went to my teacher, named Mr. Bales. I still remember this because I brought the book to him and said, hey, Mr. Bales, when do we cover this? And this was like the first week of school, because I trained myself to see where am I? And Mr. Bales looks at me, and I do not blame Mr. Bales, because this is what his response was, because it still sticks to me this day. He looked at me and was like, are you serious? We don't even get into the Civil War. How are we supposed to get into the 1970s? We don't touch that. I'm like, oh, okay. Then my question was, I don't matter. Another check the box of why I don't matter. Why my perspective, even though I find it here, but it doesn't matter to you, so it's not being brought to me. So again, bring up Black Lives Matter and ask the why behind it, and talk to your constituents and share that knowledge and come up with a future that you can say without a doubt, this is why Black Lives Matters happen in Washougal, right? This is why, because our staff, our students have shared, and this is the action we're taking, right? Again, advocacy, awareness, knowledge, skills, and advocacy, right? Don't just feel us and take action. Action means, what do you do in public schools? Not the political aspect of, whatever it's tied to. I'm saying my zone of influence is my classroom and my community and my students and my staff, right? What are we going to do to address this to make it better for the students, for all of our students, but also specifically targeting students that are marginalized, that never see themselves or have felt like they've been discriminated against in our own schools. So that's how I would approach it, from a kind of bottom up and not a top down. That makes sense.
Very cool. So I get the honor of closing this out. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity to listen to everybody. I appreciate the people who participated in the webinar and took time to send us some really thoughtful and thought-provoking questions. This definitely is a conversation that needs to continue happening. We know that the dialogue and that authentic way that we communicate with each other and connect with each other and listen and learn and understand is how we're going to move things forward. That quote from Angel Williams, that without internal change, there can be no outside change. Without collective change, no change matters. So all of us together need to continue to pause, reflect, think about this. And if anybody else on the panel wants to share something really, really quick, we have just a couple more seconds we can eke out here as we kind of wrap up with our time frame. Looks like Eric has something.
Yeah, so I want to say thank you for putting this together in partnership with us. There was a question that was asked, says why the district backtrack on the BLM stance. And I wanted to say that wasn't the district. Yeah, that was the Washougal Association of Educators, and as I'm president, I take responsibility for that. We put something out the other day on Facebook that had a logo that triggered a lot, as Ben was talking about, it triggered a lot of comments and concerns. And we therefore took that logo down because it did cause controversy. However, without that controversy and that post, that has also brought attention to our community and to our school district and to now our students and teachers, where that conversation is a part of, is another way of that we are addressing these issues. So for that, I said that was not the district, that was the union, and I take full responsibility for that post. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. Really appreciate everybody being here and appreciate your time. Look for information on the district's equity webpage. That's at www.washougal.k12.wa.us/equity. We will post our process for community people, which includes staff, parents, students, and anybody else who's interested in being part of our equity work. Over the next couple of days, we'll also be advertising that through the Post Record and on the district Facebook page to try to make sure, as Ben said, that we have the right people at the table when we're designing the plan, so that instead of going and trying to market it to people and having them look at it and say, well, this isn't what we wanted, that we have the right people there to make the recommendations and to come up with the work that is going to move us forward. So I appreciate you all, and thank you very much.
Take care.